The glass was already in my hand when I noticed something wrong. Not the taste, not the smell, the way he wouldn't look at me. He raised his own drink too fast, hands shaking, smile forced. That's when I knew. This wasn't a toast, it was a goodbye. So I did something instinct took over. I switched the glasses. 6 minutes later, my nephew collapsed on the floor of my own party. And everyone screamed. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Harold Finch. I'm 64 years old, and this happened in my home in Savannah, Georgia. I threw that party to celebrate survival. I never imagined I'd need to survive it. And I never imagined the person who wanted me gone was someone I helped raise. I didn't want the party, that's the truth. My doctor suggested it first, said surviving the surgery wasn't just physical, it was psychological. You need a marker, he said, a moment your brain can point to and say. I lived, so I agreed. A small gathering, family, food, music low enough to talk over, nothing extravagant. I hadn't hosted anything since my wife passed. The house still carried her absence like a draft you couldn't seal, but my nephew insisted. I'll handle everything, Uncle Harold, he said. You just show up and smile. That should have been my first warning. Because when someone is eager to take control of a night that's meant to celebrate you, it's rarely about kindness. The guests arrived slowly. Hugs, laughter, familiar voices echoing through rooms that had been quiet for too long. I stood near the kitchen island, holding court like an old man pretending he wasn't tired. And there he was, my nephew, always close, always watching. He refilled drinks without being asked, moved plates before they were empty, hovered, too attentive. Most people would call it care, I didn't. I'd known him since he was 6 years old. I knew when his smiles were real and when they were rehearsed. Tonight, every smile felt practiced. I raised my glass for the first toast. Thank you all for coming, I said. My doctor says I'm stubborn enough to outlive him. Laughter, glasses clinked. But when my nephew lifted his glass, his hand shook, just slightly, barely noticeable, but I noticed. Because fear always leaks through the hands first. Let me explain something about family. People think betrayal comes from enemies, strangers, outsiders. That's comforting. But betrayal doesn't survive in cold places. It grows where trust is fed daily, where doors are unlocked, where no one thinks to look twice. I raised my nephew after his father disappeared, paid for his school, gave him work when no one else would. I never asked for gratitude, but I never expected this. As the night went on, I started noticing patterns. He discouraged certain people from standing near me, redirected conversations, kept positioning himself between me and the kitchen, like a chess player controlling the board. At one point, my cousin leaned in and whispered, "You okay? You look pale." I nodded, but I wasn't pale, I was alert. There's a difference. The drink came from him, that's important. He handed it to me personally, didn't let anyone else touch it. Your favorite, he said. Just like you like it. I didn't correct him because it wasn't my favorite. He'd gotten it wrong. And that's when everything slowed down. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn to trust instincts over logic. Logic tells you family wouldn't do this. Instinct tells you something is wrong even when you don't want to believe it. I looked at the glass. Clear liquid. No smell, perfect, too perfect. Then I looked at him. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That's when instinct screamed. I didn't panic, I didn't accuse, I didn't react. I waited, the music shifted. Someone laughed too loud. A fork clinked against a plate. And in that noise I made the smallest movement of the night. I switched glasses. No drama, no flair, just a casual reach like adjusting space. He didn't notice, but his body did, because suddenly he went still. We talked for a few more minutes. He asked me how I was feeling, too casually, too soon. I answered normally, and I watched him. The clock above the stove ticked. 1 minute, 2, he swallowed hard, 3, his smile faded, 4, a bead of sweat rolled down his temple, 5, his hand went to the counter, 6, and then he collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the floor cut through the room like glass breaking. Someone screamed. A chair toppled. People rushed forward. I didn't move. I stood there holding the glass, still untouched, still steady. "Call 911, someone shouted. My cousin knelt beside him. "He's not okay, he's not okay." I looked down at my nephew, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow, alive. But barely. And as the room descended into chaos, only one thought crossed my mind. He didn't expect me to switch the drinks. Which meant this wasn't his first time planning it. Because poison isn't an impulse. It's preparation. And as the sirens approached in the distance, I realized something terrifying. If I hadn't trusted my instinct, this party would have ended very differently. The sirens arrived before anyone could think straight. Red and blue lights bled through the windows, washing my living room in colors that didn't belong there. 2 paramedics rushed in first. Then the police. Questions started immediately. What happened? Who was last with him? Was there alcohol involved? Too many voices, too much movement. I stayed exactly where I was. Still holding the glass, still calm, because panic belongs to the guilty. The paramedic looked up from my nephew's body. "He's alive," she said, "but barely. We need to move him. Now." They lifted him onto a stretcher. As they did, his eyes fluttered open for a moment. And for half a second he looked straight at me. Not confused, not afraid, angry. That look told me everything I needed to know. A police officer approached me, mid-40s, tired eyes, calm voice. "Sir," he said, "I'm going to need to ask you a few questions." I nodded. "Of course." He glanced at the glass in my hand. "Is that what you were drinking?" "Yes." "Did you feel ill?" "No." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Then why did he?" I met his gaze. "That's what I'd like to know." They separated everyone. Family in the living room, friends in the dining area, me alone in the kitchen. The officer took notes. "Who poured the drinks?" "My nephew." "Anyone else?" "No." "And you're certain you didn't add anything to his glass?" I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I said calmly, "I didn't touch his drink." Which was true. I touched mine. The officer paused his pen. "You said he handed you the drink." "Yes." "And then he collapsed." "Yes." The officer leaned back slightly. "Mr. Finch, I'm going to be direct." I nodded. "There's a chance this was an accident. There's also a chance it wasn't." I said nothing. Silence invites mistakes. After an hour, the house felt hollow. Most guests had been sent home. The music was off, the food untouched. A celebration turned crime scene. The officer returned with a small evidence bag. Inside was my glass, sealed, labeled. He looked at me carefully. "We're sending this for testing," he said, "as well as blood samples from your nephew." "Of course," he hesitated. "There's something else." I waited. "We found an empty vial in the trash." My chest tightened. "Glass," he continued, "about the size of a thumb, no label." I nodded slowly. "From the kitchen." "Yes," I exhaled. So he had planned it. The officer lowered his voice. "Do you have any reason to believe your nephew would want to harm you?" I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because the question was naive. "I helped raise him," I said, "paid his debts, gave him a job. I trusted him." The officer studied my face. "That's not an answer." I met his eyes. "No," I said quietly, "it's a warning." Hours later, after the house was cleared and the police left, I sat alone in the living room. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavy, judging. I replayed the night over and over, his shaking hands, his refusal to meet my eyes. The timing, 6 minutes, he knew exactly how long it would take, which meant someone taught him. The phone rang, I stared at it. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. "Yes," a woman's voice, calm, professional. "This is County General Hospital." My stomach tightened. "Yes." "Your nephew regained consciousness." I said nothing. "He's stable," she continued. "But he's asking to speak with you." I closed my eyes. "When?" "Now." The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and regret. He lay in the bed, pale, an IV in his arm, heart monitor ticking softly. When he saw me, his jaw tightened. The nurse stepped out. We were alone. He didn't speak at first. Neither did I. Then he laughed, a weak, bitter sound. "You're lucky," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Lucky you switched the drinks," he whispered. "If you hadn't," I leaned closer. If I hadn't, I said calmly, you'd be lying in a coffin instead of a hospital bed. He looked away. Silence stretched. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I didn't want to do it, I straightened. Then why did you? His voice shook. Because someone told me to. I felt the room tilt. Who? I asked. He swallowed. They said if I didn't, they'd ruin me. Who? He turned back to me. Fear filled his eyes. Your lawyer. The word hit harder than any confession. My lawyer, I repeated. He nodded weakly. The one you trust. The one who manages your estate. My heart pounded. No, I said, you're lying. I wish I was, he whispered. He said everything would go to him anyway, that you were already planning to cut me out. I stood slowly. That's impossible. He shook his head. He showed me documents, changes, signatures. I felt something crack inside my chest. Because I had changed my will, quietly, recently, but only one person knew. I leaned in close. Listen to me, I said slowly. If you're lying, this is the last chance to stop. He met my eyes. I didn't poison you, he whispered. I poisoned myself because he told me you'd already drank it. My breath caught. He said you'd be dead in minutes. I stepped back. The room felt too small, too bright, too dangerous. Because suddenly the truth wasn't about a nephew. It was about someone who knew my finances, my habits, my trust, someone who didn't need to poison me, someone who could erase me legally. And as I turned to leave the room, my phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. We need to talk, urgently. I didn't reply to the text. That was the first decision I made that night without hesitation. When someone who just got named as the architect of your attempted death says, we need to talk, you don't talk, you listen. I left the hospital without looking back. The automatic doors slid shut behind me with a soft hiss, like the place itself wanted distance from what I just learned. Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. I sat in my car for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, heart pounding. My lawyer, the man I trusted with my will, my estate, my medical directives. The man who'd sat across from me after my surgery and said, let's make sure everything is in order. I thought I'd been protecting my family. Instead, I'd handed someone the map. I drove home slowly. Not because I was tired, because I was thinking. The kind of thinking you do when you realize every past conversation might need to be reinterpreted. The house was dark when I arrived. Too dark. I always left the porch light on. I sat there for a moment, engine running, watching the windows. Nothing moved. I shut off the engine. Silence. When I stepped inside, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my study. The safe was still behind the painting, still locked. Good. But the desk drawers, one was open, just an inch, enough to notice. Enough to tell me someone had been here. I didn't touch anything. I took photos instead. Every drawer, every surface, every footprint. Then I sat down and finally opened the text thread. Lawyer, we need to talk, urgently, no greeting. No concern, just urgency. I typed back one line. ME about what? 3 dots appeared instantly. Then, lawyer, your nephew, the incident, it complicates things. Not are you okay, not this is terrible. I typed slowly. Me, what things? There was a pause this time, longer. Then, lawyer, your estate plan. My jaw tightened. There it was. I decided then I wasn't going to confront him. I was going to confirm. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal he'd set up for me years ago. Username, password, access granted. I navigated to the will. The date stopped me cold. Last modified 2 weeks ago. I hadn't been to his office in over a month. I clicked the document, scrolled, and felt something hollow out in my chest. Majority beneficiary, the Finch Family Trust. Trustee, my lawyer. Successor beneficiaries, removed. Charitable donations, removed. Contingency clause, in the event of the grantor's sudden death or incapacity, the trustee shall assume full control. He hadn't just adjusted my will. He'd rewritten it, and he'd done it quietly, legally. With documents I recognized but signatures I didn't remember making. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't greed. This was orchestration. The phone rang, not a text, a call. His name lit up the screen. I let it ring. Once, twice. On the third ring I answered, yes. His voice was smooth, controlled. Harold, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. You said we needed to talk. Yes, he said quickly. This situation with your nephew, it's very serious. You told him I was cutting him out, I said. Silence. A beat too long, then a soft sigh. Harold, he's confused. He's sick, you know that. I smiled. He couldn't see it. That's interesting, I said, because he knew about the changes you made to my will. Another pause, this one longer. I acted in your best interest, he said finally. You acted without my permission. I had verbal authorization. No, I said calmly. You had access. His tone sharpened slightly. Be careful, Harold. There it was, the first crack. Careful of what? I asked. Of accusations, he replied. Of misunderstandings. This is already a legal nightmare. For who? I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Then, for everyone. I leaned back in my chair. Did you poison the drink? I asked. No, he said quickly. I would never. But you told him I already drank it, I cut in. You convinced him the poison was harmless. That he was just testing it. Silence, not denial, just silence. That's criminal, I said quietly. He cleared his throat. Harold, listen to me. You're emotional. You've been through a lot. No, I said. I've been alert. I heard a faint sound on his end. Movement. He wasn't alone. That was when I knew this wasn't a solo act. Who else is involved? I asked. Harold, who? I repeated. His voice dropped. There are people who invest in outcomes, he said carefully. People who don't like uncertainty. I laughed softly. So you tried to remove it. You're 64, he said. You've had surgery. No one would question a sudden decline. The room felt colder. You were planning this before the party, I said. Yes, he admitted, but I didn't expect you to survive. There it was. The truth. I ended the call, not because I was done, but because I had enough. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. By morning, I'd made 3 calls. A forensic document examiner, a financial crimes investigator, and an old friend who owed me a favor from a long time ago. By noon, I had confirmation. My signature had been traced, copied, inserted, and notarized by someone in my lawyer's office. Someone whose name I recognized. His junior partner. The pieces clicked into place. The nephew was the fall guy. The poison was a scare tactic. The real plan was paper. Legal, clean, final. At 3:17 p.m. my doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was my lawyer standing on my porch, briefcase in hand, smiling. I didn't answer. Instead, I texted him. Me, you shouldn't be here. My phone buzzed instantly. Lawyer, we need to finalize things. I typed back, me, the police are on their way. He froze, the smile vanished. Then he typed, lawyer, you don't have proof. I looked at the folder on my desk. Photos, reports, signatures. I typed one last message. Me, I have enough. I watched through the camera as his phone buzzed, as he read it, as he slowly backed away from my door, and as he realized the man he tried to erase was still very much alive. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak through it either. I watched my lawyer retreat through the camera feed, his confident posture replaced by something tighter, sharper. Fear, not panic, calculation. That was worse, because people like him don't run when cornered. They pivot. Within an hour, the calls started. Unknown numbers, blocked numbers, numbers I recognized but hadn't heard from in years. Former colleagues, financial advisors, even a board member from a charity I once funded. They all said the same thing in different words. Something's going around. People are asking questions. There's concern about your stability. Stability. That word again. It was the same word my lawyer used when he rewrote my life on paper. I understood the strategy immediately. If they couldn't remove me quietly, they would discredit me publicly, make me look confused, emotional, unreliable. An old man unraveling after trauma. That way, even if the truth surfaced, no one would fully believe it. By evening, the first article appeared online. Not accusing, just suggestive. Local businessman involved in disturbing family incident. Questions raised about estate planning after poisoning scare. No names. No facts, just implication. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me. Not fear, resolve. They thought I'd hide. They thought I'd let lawyers talk. They forgot something important. I built my life before the internet, before spin, before narratives. I knew how to speak plainly and make people listen. The next morning I made my move. I didn't call a press conference. I didn't release statements. I invited people into my home, the same house, the same living room where my nephew collapsed. I called two reporters I trusted, the financial crimes investigator, the forensic examiner, and the police detective assigned to the case. I told them all the same thing. I'm ready. They arrived just after noon. Cameras stayed outside. This wasn't a spectacle, it was documentation. I laid everything out on the dining table, the altered will, the signature analysis, the emails, the call logs, the hospital statement from my nephew. I didn't editorialize, I didn't dramatize, I just told the truth, slowly, chronologically, letting the weight of it build on its own. The room went quiet. One of the reporters finally spoke. "Do you believe your nephew intended to kill you?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I believe he was manipulated. Fear does terrible things to young men who feel trapped. And your lawyer," I met her eyes, "he knew exactly what he was doing." The detective asked the question that mattered. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" I didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't tactical, it was human. Because when someone tries to erase you, I said, you want to make sure they can't try again. Silence followed. Then the investigator nodded. He understood. By nightfall, the story changed. The article was updated, names added, documents cited, language sharpened. Now it wasn't concern, it was investigation. My lawyer's office released a statement denying everything. Standard, cold, predictable. But then the junior partner broke. He called the investigator, asked for immunity, and everything unraveled. The junior partner told them how it worked, how documents were intercepted, how signatures were scanned, how notaries were pressured, how trusts were quietly redirected. He even admitted something worse. The poisoning wasn't the first plan, just the fastest one. The original plan was to have me declared incompetent. Medical evaluations, psychological assessments, quiet court filings. My nephew was only brought in when time became an issue, when my recovery moved faster than expected. When I refused to slow down, the arrest came 2 days later. No dramatic takedown, just a quiet walk out of his office in handcuffs. Head down, briefcase left behind. The cameras caught it anyway, they always do. That night my phone rang. The hospital, my nephew wanted to speak again. I almost didn't go, but I did. He looked smaller, not physically, emotionally. "I didn't want this," he said, voice cracking. "I didn't want any of this." "I know," I said. Tears slid down his face. "I thought if you died, everything would stop." I sat beside him. "Nothing stops that way," I said quietly. "It only spreads." He nodded. "I'll tell them everything." "I know," I said. When I got home, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The house felt different, not safer, clearer, like fog lifting. I poured myself a drink, my drink, and raised the glass alone, not in celebration, in acknowledgement I was still here. They hadn't finished me. But the story wasn't over yet, because justice doesn't end with arrests. It ends with consequences. And tomorrow I was going to make sure the right ones came. The courthouse didn't look intimidating. That surprised me. I expected towering stone, cold steps, something that felt like justice. Instead, it looked ordinary, like any other building where people decide who wins and who loses. I arrived early, not because I was eager, because I wanted to watch who showed up. My lawyer's former colleagues arrived first. Some avoided eye contact. Some nodded politely. One even tried to shake my hand. I didn't take it. Then the reporters. They whispered more than they spoke now. Not hungry, cautious. The narrative had shifted again. This wasn't a tragic misunderstanding anymore. This was a calculated attempt to erase a man with paperwork and poison. When they brought him in, I barely recognized him. Not because he looked different, but because the authority he once carried was gone. No tailored suit, no briefcase, No confident stride. Just a man walking carefully like each step might crack the floor beneath him. He didn't look at me. That was new. The judge called the case. Charges were read: fraud, forgery, coercion, conspiracy to commit homicide. The room exhaled as one. I stayed still. I wasn't here to enjoy this. I was here to finish it. They started with the documents, projected onto screens. Side-by-side comparisons, my real signature, the forged one. Tiny inconsistencies only experts notice. Pressure curves, stroke hesitation, ink flow interruptions. The forensic examiner explained it calmly, like a teacher, like this was inevitable. The junior partner testified next, voice shaking, hands clasped. He told them how the idea came up casually at first. How do we streamline this? What if Harold becomes unavailable? He used the word unavailable. Like I was a meeting conflict. He admitted they laughed, at first. Then came the hospital testimony. My nephew's statement was read aloud. Not live. He wasn't ready for that, but his words filled the room anyway. I believed him. I thought I was testing something harmless. I didn't know the dose could kill me. I closed my eyes. The room stayed silent longer than necessary. When my lawyer finally spoke, it wasn't a denial. It was justification. He talked about efficiency, about legacy, about assets being wasted on unfocused beneficiaries. He said he believed he was protecting my estate, protecting me. I stared at him, and for the first time since this began, I felt anger. Real anger, not fear, not disbelief. Anger. When it was my turn, I didn't bring notes. I stood slowly. The room leaned forward. I trusted him, I said simply. That's the crime. No drama, no shaking voice. He didn't steal my money, he stole my certainty. I paused. He decided my life was inconvenient. I looked at the judge. And I'm still here. Cross-examination didn't last long. There wasn't much to argue. The evidence spoke for itself. The damage was done. By the time the judge adjourned for the day, everyone knew where this was going. Outside, cameras waited, microphones rose, questions flew. How do you feel? Do you forgive him? Was it worth it? I stopped, turned, and said the only thing that mattered. This wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping the next person. Then I walked away. That night I sat alone again, but it felt different now. The quiet wasn't heavy, it was earned. I poured a drink, sat at the table, and thought about how close I came to disappearing. Not violently, not loudly, but politely, legally. That scared me more than anything. The verdict came 2 days later. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing scheduled. No cheers, no gasps. Just a collective understanding that something ugly had been exposed. Afterward, I visited my nephew. He looked better, stronger, still ashamed. I ruined everything, he said. No, I replied. You showed how fragile trust can be. He nodded slowly. I'll spend the rest of my life fixing this. I hope you do, I said, and I meant it. When I got home, I opened the safe again, replaced the will, restored what was removed, added something new, a clause, a lesson. No one person shall ever hold complete control, because control is tempting, and temptation is dangerous in the wrong hands. That night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something quietly powerful. They didn't fail because they underestimated me. They failed because they assumed I wouldn't notice. And noticing is what saved my life. The sentencing hearing felt heavier than the trial, not louder, not more dramatic, heavier, like the air itself had weight. I arrived early again, not out of habit this time, out of necessity. I needed to see his face when the consequences stopped being theoretical. He was brought in wearing the same suit he'd worn to court for years. But it didn't fit anymore, not physically. Authority shrinks when it's exposed. He avoided my eyes still. That was the pattern. Even now, the judge didn't waste time. She reviewed the facts, the intent, the escalation, the use of trust as a weapon. Her voice was calm, almost clinical, which somehow made it worse. She spoke of breach of fiduciary duty as if it were sterile language. But I knew what it meant. It meant betrayal with a pen. When it was time for victim impact statements, I stood again. This time my legs felt heavier, not weak, heavy. I lost my wife years ago, I said. That taught me how final loss feels. I paused. What happened here taught me something else. I looked directly at him now. How fragile life becomes when the people closest to you decide you're expendable. He finally looked up. Just for a moment. There was no anger there, just recognition. I continued. You didn't just try to kill me. You tried to replace me, erase me, quietly. The courtroom was silent. That kind of violence doesn't leave bruises, I said, but it lasts longer. I sat down. I didn't say another word. The defense argued leniency. Mental strain, poor judgment, no prior record. I didn't listen closely because I already knew what mattered. The judge did too. She stood. And when she spoke, her voice was steady. Mister, she said, using his name, you didn't act out of desperation. You acted out of calculation. She paused. You took advantage of trust to gain control over another human being's life. Another pause. That makes you dangerous. The sentence followed. Years not symbolic, not light, years that couldn't be appealed away easily. He closed his eyes just once, then nodded. Like he'd expected it. As he was led away, something unexpected happened. He turned, looked straight at me, and mouthed two words, I'm sorry. I didn't respond, because apologies after intent are just echoes. Outside the courthouse, the air felt lighter, not because justice was done, but because the waiting was over. My phone buzzed. A message from my nephew. I heard, I'm proud of you. I stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, heel first. We'll talk later. That was the truth. That evening I sat in my living room alone again, but this time the silence felt earned. I poured myself a drink, paused, smelled it, laughed softly at myself. Some instincts don't fade. I thought about how close I came to dying without knowing why. About how easily a narrative could have been written around my absence. Natural causes, complications, unfortunate timing, and how many people would have nodded and moved on. That thought stayed with me. The next morning I did something I hadn't planned. I visited the cemetery, not for closure, for acknowledgement. I stood beside my wife's grave and spoke aloud. They tried, I said quietly, but they didn't finish. The wind moved through the trees. No answers, no signs, just the feeling that saying it mattered. Back home I finalized the last changes, not to my will, to my life. I stepped down from boards, transferred control, simplified everything. Not because I was afraid, but because clarity is protection. I also set up a foundation, one focused on legal literacy, teaching people how power hides in paperwork, how trust can be weaponized, how to ask better questions before it's too late. The first letter I received was from a stranger. I thought this only happened in movies, it said. Thank you for telling the truth. I folded it carefully, put it in a drawer. Truth doesn't need trophies. Weeks later, my nephew was released, charges reduced. Treatment mandated. We met once, briefly. No hugs, just honesty. I don't expect forgiveness, he said. You shouldn't, I replied, but you can expect accountability. He nodded. That was enough. One night long after the story stopped trending, I sat on the porch, listening to the quiet, the real quiet, not the one that hides danger, the one that means nothing is chasing you. And I realized something important. Surviving wasn't the victory, seeing clearly was, because the most dangerous thing isn't poison, it's convenience. It's letting someone else decide what happens to you because it's easier. I don't do easy anymore. The house felt different once everything was over, not quieter, clearer. Like a room after a storm passes and the air finally knows how to breathe again. I woke up the morning after sentencing, and for the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel tight. No court date hanging over me. No calls waiting. No dread. Just morning light sliding across the floor. I stood there longer than necessary, barefoot, listening to the hum of a world that had moved on. And I realized something important. I had almost been erased without anyone screaming. People think danger announces itself. It doesn't. It arrives politely, with paperwork, with reassurances, with smiles from people who know your habits better than you do. That scared me more than the poison ever could. I sold the house 3 months later, not because it haunted me, because it held too much memory of who I used to be. The man who assumed loyalty, the man who delegated trust instead of verifying it. I downsized. A smaller place, closer to the coast, windows that faced water instead of neighbors. Somewhere I could hear waves and remember that time moves forward whether you're ready or not. The foundation took off faster than I expected. People wrote to me. Not just investors or professionals, regular people, widows, retirees, parents, all saying the same thing in different ways. I didn't know how vulnerable I was until I heard your story. That mattered more than any verdict. My nephew stayed quiet. That was a good sign. Recovery isn't loud, it's slow, uncomfortable, private. We spoke only once more. He asked me a question I'd been expecting. Do you hate me? I thought about it, then answered honestly. No, I said, but I don't trust you either. He nodded. That was the first adult response I'd ever seen from him. Sometimes, late at night, I replay the moment I switched the glasses. Not dramatically, not heroically, just instinct. A tiny decision that redirected everything. That's what people forget. Life doesn't change in explosions. It changes in seconds no one else notices. The lawyer never contacted me again. He couldn't. Prison strips people of the illusion that they can still control outcomes. That's what he lost. Control. And control was the only thing he ever valued. I still drink, but slower now. I still trust, but selectively. And I read everything, every line, every signature, every clause, not because I'm paranoid, because awareness is cheaper than recovery. On my 65th birthday, I sat alone on the porch. A simple dinner, a single glass of bourbon. I raised it, not to survival, not to justice, but to clarity, because clarity saved my life. I used to believe that family was protection. Now I understand something deeper. Awareness is protection. And the moment you stop paying attention is the moment someone else starts deciding what happens to you. The party was supposed to celebrate that I survived surgery. Instead, it revealed something more important. I survived people. And that is the kind of survival you never forget. Some people poison drinks, others poison trust. The second one almost killed me.